Shaw and Greis stood in the dimly lit closet, their breaths visible in the cold air as they stared at the strange wall before them. Unlike the rest of the bunker's aging concrete, this section was newer, smoother, and lacked the grime and wear of its surroundings.
This doesn't belong here.
Greis nodded.
It's a door. Hidden, but it's definitely a door.
The two men exchanged a look before bracing themselves and pushing against the wall. At first, nothing happened, but as they applied more force, it began to creak and shift. With a groan of metal and wood, the panel gave way, revealing a narrow passage. They stepped inside cautiously, the dim glow of a fire ahead illuminating the cramped space.
Bloody hell!
The room was unmistakably lived in. A small cot lay tucked against the far wall with a rumpled blanket spilling onto the floor. A makeshift table held a few tins of food, some half-opened, alongside a stack of worn books. The fire in the corner crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the walls.
Someone's been living here.
I think that's fairly obvious, Greis.
Shaw picked up one of the books, flipping through its pages. It was written in English, but annotations in German lined the margins. He frowned.
Whoever it is, they're fluent in both.
Greis moved toward the fire, inspecting a pan that still had traces of grease in it.
This isn't old. They were here recently. Could still be here.
We should tell the captains.
Evans and Klaus entered the main room of the bunker, shaking off snow and stamping their boots to rid them of the ice. The storm was as strong as ever, and their faces bore the exhaustion of days spent battling the elements. Evans hung his coat on a hook near the fire, letting out a heavy sigh.
Still no break in the storm. We're stuck for at least another day.
Klaus grunted, removing his gloves and holding his hands out to the fire.
We need to conserve fuel. If this goes on much longer, we'll have to ration the wood. It is getting too dangerous to keep trekking out and taking unnecessary risks.
Evans nodded, glancing around the room. Most of the men were gathered near the fire or leaning against the walls, their faces weary but alert. He turned to address Shaw, but the sergeant wasn't there.
Where's Shaw?
Before anyone could answer, a voice rang out from the shadows.
Don't move.
Evans and Klaus froze, their eyes darting toward the source of the voice. The Phantom stepped into the firelight, a rifle aimed steadily at the two captains. He was tall and wiry, his face gaunt, but his eyes sharp with intensity. His clothes were a patchwork of scavenged uniforms, and his hands were steady despite the strain in his voice. Behind him, Shaw and Greis knelt on the floor. The rest of the men were lined up against the walls, their hands raised in compliance.
Everyone stays where they are. I do not want to kill anyone, but I will if I must.
Evans's eyes flicked to Shaw, who gave the faintest shake of his head. No chance of a surprise move.
Who are you?
I could ask you same thing, but I already know answer.
What do you mean?
What do I mean? I've been living here for weeks, listening, watching. You lot are terrible at keeping secrets.
Evans clenched his fists.
If you've been watching us, then you know we're just trying to survive the storm. Same as you.
The Phantom barked a laugh.
Oh, do not play coy with me. I know who you are. I know what you are. And now, you are going to tell everyone else.
He gestured with the rifle, motioning for Evans and Klaus to sit on the floor. Reluctantly, they complied. The Phantom moved to the fire, grabbing a steak from the grill with his bare hand. He bit into it, chewing slowly as he watched the group.
You have good food here, better than what I have in weeks. Shame, I will have to take it all when I am done with you.
If you're going to kill us, just do it. Spare us the dramatics.
Oh, I am not going to kill you. Not yet. First, you are going to tell us all truth. All of it.
He turned to Klaus, his rifle now aimed squarely at the German captain.
You first. Tell us who you really are.
Klaus hesitated as he glanced at Evans, who gave a barely perceptible nod.
We're not going to tell you shit. You'll have to kill us before we relinquish any information to the likes of you.
The Phantom was still trained on Klaus.
Is this how you feel also?
It is true. It is my duty to protect information with my life.
I figured that it might come to this. All right, as you wish.
The Phantom signaled for Shaw and Greis to stand before him.
Since you will not tell us truth, then how do you feel if I take your men's lives instead? Now, you can either tell us truth or I execute these men. I am sure you do not want to be responsible for these men telling their families you killed them.
Fine. Let us make a deal. Remove our men from harm's way and we will tell you.
Oh, now you want to make deal. Not that you are in a position to negotiate, but I will bite. Go on. Take seat, man.
Okay, we're not who we seem.
Yes. Keep going.
My men and I, we're not German. My real name is Captain Alan Higginbotham. We're British, on a covert mission.
The room erupted into whispers, the soldiers exchanging shocked glances. The Phantom grinned, clearly enjoying the chaos.
And you? What about you and your lot?
Evans stared at Klaus, betrayal flashing across his face. But he knew there was no point in keeping the charade any longer.
We are not British. My real name is Helmut Messerschmidt. We are Germans, sent here undercover for the Reich.
The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation settling over the group like a heavy blanket. The Phantom laughed, shaking his head.
What a bunch of hypocrites. Pretending to be each other while sitting in same damn bunker. Now, for further entertainment purposes, you will each reveal your story, how you got to this point.
The man paced in front of the group, his boots clapping sharply against the hardwood floor. His sharp uniform and clipped accent left no doubt about his authority. He stopped abruptly, his steely gaze locking on Helmut Messerschmidt, who stood at rigid attention.
Du bist nicht länger Helmut Messerschmidt. Du bist Captain Evans, ein britischer Offizier, ein stolzer Sohn Englands.
Helmut kept his expression neutral. Captain Evans, British officer. It was surreal. Before the war, he'd been managing his family's modest hardware shop in Stuttgart. Now he was tasked with becoming someone entirely different. The man continued.
Deine Aufgabe ist es, alles Britische zu verkörpern. Ihre Sprache, ihre Manieren, ihre Bräuche. Du wirst das englische Leben essen, schlafen und atmen, bis du sogar die patriotischsten ihrer Landsleute täuschen kannst.
Understood, sir.
The officer turned away, his hands clasped behind his back.
Das wird nicht einfach sein. Du wirst auf jede erdenkliche Weise geprüft. Der Moment, in dem du dich verrätst, ein falsches Wort, ein unpassender Ausdruck, wirst du scheitern. Und scheitern ist keine Option. Du darfst deine wahre Identität nicht preisgeben, selbst wenn du auf andere Deutsche triffst. Für das Vaterland wirst du Erfolg haben. Wegtreten.
Helmut saluted crisply and left the room, his mind buzzing with the enormity of the task ahead. Outside, the training camp stretched before him, rows of barracks, a mess hall, and beyond that, a vast forest used for field exercises. He wasn't alone in this transformation. 20 other men were undergoing the same training, each becoming a different version of an enemy they despised. The first weeks were grueling. Language lessons began at dawn, drilling him on British vernacular, slang, and dialects until his tongue felt twisted in knots. Helmut's instructor, a sharp-tongued linguist, was relentless.
Do it again. It's bloody hell, not bloody Heil. You sound like you're giving a salute.
Helmut sighed but repeated the phrase, adjusting his pronunciation until she finally nodded. Cultural immersion followed. Helmut and his peers were drilled on British customs, forced to read newspapers, listen to BBC broadcasts, and memorize the details of daily life in London. Their instructors quizzed them relentlessly.
Was essen die Briten zum Frühstück?
Beans, eggs, toast and tea.
Und zum Abendessen?
Roast beef with Yorkshire pudding.
The physical training was equally demanding. Helmut was taught to march like a British soldier, to handle their weapons, and to mimic their drills. The first time he fired a Lee-Enfield rifle, he winced at the unfamiliar kick.
Gewöhn dich daran. Das ist jetzt deine Waffe.
By the third month, Helmut found himself slipping into his new identity without realizing it. His German accent faded, his movements became less rigid, and he could banter with his peers in fluent English. He even found himself enjoying the British humor, a wry wit that was so different from the bluntness he'd grown up with. But the training wasn't just about becoming British. It was about understanding the enemy. Helmut spent hours studying maps, learning troop movements, and memorizing the names of key British officers. He practiced scenarios where he might be questioned, rehearsing his answers until they became second nature.
Was ist dein Rang und Regiment?
Captain Evans, 2nd Battalion Grenadier Guards.
Wo waren Sie vor dieser Mission stationiert?
London, sir. Assigned to intelligence work at Whitehall.
The instructor scrutinized him for a long moment before nodding.
Akzeptabel. Aber denk daran, ein einziger Fehler und sie hängen dich als Spion.
Helmut didn't need the reminder. He knew the stakes. On the other side of Europe, in a similar camp hidden deep in the Bavarian Alps, Alan Higginbotham stood at attention as his instructor addressed him.
You are no longer Alan Higginbotham. You are Captain Klaus, a loyal officer of the Wehrmacht.
Alan's stomach churned. He'd grown up in Manchester, the son of a steelworker, and joining the British Army had been his way out of a life of grinding poverty. Now he was being asked to turn himself into the enemy, a transformation that felt as unnatural as it was necessary.
Your mission is clear. You will infiltrate German operations, gather intelligence, and report back. To do this, you must become German in every way that matters.
Verstanden, Herr.
The instructor's eyes narrowed.
Do you, though? Because if you slip, if you give them even a hint of your true identity, they will not hesitate to execute you. Is that clear?
Ja, Herr.
The training began immediately. Alan's mornings were consumed with language lessons, his German improving rapidly under the tutelage of a linguist who seemed to take pleasure in correcting his mistakes. Alan repeated all the words until the instructor was satisfied, though his frustration simmered beneath the surface. Afternoons were spent learning German customs and culture. Alan studied their literature, listened to Wagner, and memorized the names of cities, rivers, and landmarks. His instructors drilled him on everything from military protocols to the layout of Berlin.
What's the capital of Bavaria?
Munich.
And its population?
Ungefähr 38.000.
The physical training was punishing. Alan was taught to handle German weapons, his hands growing accustomed to the weight of a Carabiner 98K rifle. He learned their marching drills, their salutes, their discipline. By the 4th month, Alan found himself slipping into his new persona more easily than he'd expected. His Manchester accent faded, replaced by a clipped German tone. His instructors praised his progress, though they never let him grow complacent.
Your enemy will not give you a second chance, remember that. And for this to work, you cannot, under any circumstances and no matter the rank questioning you, reveal your true identities, even if your life depends on it. You only report to this body.
The most challenging part of the training was the psychological conditioning. Alan was forced to confront his hatred of the Germans, to bury it deep beneath his new identity. He sat through lectures extolling the virtues of the Reich, repeating phrases that made his skin crawl.
You don't have to believe it. You just have to sound like you do.
Both men completed their training after 12 grueling months, emerging as entirely different people. Helmut Messerschmitt became Captain Evans, a sharp-tongued British officer with a knack for strategy. Alan Higginbotham transformed into Captain Klaus, a disciplined German leader who exuded authority. Their missions were clear: infiltrate, gather intelligence, and return without being discovered. Failure wasn't an option. As they prepared to deploy, each man stood in front of a mirror staring at the stranger reflected back at him. For Helmut, the clean-shaven, sharp-dressed Brit looking back felt like a mask he couldn't wait to shed. For Alan, the stern German officer in his reflection was a reminder of the life he'd left behind. Neither man knew what their paths would cross, or the lengths they would go to protect their secrets.
Wow. Okay. So this is really blowing my mind. Now, the question is, what am I going to do with you all? I cannot exactly just let you walk out of here. I think I will just take you 2 captains as prisoners of war. I can probably get a pretty penny for turning in each of you. The rest of your men, I will have to put them out of their misery.
As he spoke, Evans's hand moved subtly to his ankle where the Derringer was hidden. He waited until the Phantom turned slightly, then drew the weapon and fired. The shot struck the Phantom in the shoulder, sending him staggering back. The rifle fell from his grasp as he clutched at the wound, his face twisted in pain. Chaos erupted as the soldiers scrambled for their weapons. Within moments, the room was a sea of rifles and pistols, each man aiming at someone else, a classic Mexican standoff. Evans kept his Derringer trained on the Phantom, his voice sharp.
Everyone stop, put the guns down.
The men hesitated, their hands shaking as they kept their weapons raised. The Phantom, now slumped against the wall, sneered through his pain.
You're all fools. This truce of yours is a joke. You are enemies. Kill each other and get it over with.
Evans stepped forward, his eyes blazing.
We're more than that. We've survived together. We've saved each other's lives. That has to mean something.
He's right. We've been through too much to let this bastard tear us apart now.
The Phantom laughed weakly.
You think a speech is going to change anything? You're soldiers. Killers. It's in your nature.
Shut up. This isn't about you.
The tension in the room was suffocating, but slowly, one by one, the soldiers began to lower their weapons. Evans turned back to the Phantom, his expression hard.
You don't belong here, and you sure as hell don't get to judge us, seeing as how you're most likely a Russian deserter.
Before the man could respond, Klaus stepped forward and delivered a sharp blow to the side of his head, knocking him unconscious. The room exhaled collectively, the weight of the moment finally breaking. Evans looked around at the men, his voice steady.
We made it through tonight. Let's not waste it.